I knew my parents were coming today, and they are back row Baptists, so I gave them a run for their money. Here's one explanation for the seating arrangement this morning. There's all kinds of explanations that I was throwing out there this morning. You may find out eventually what the actuality of it is. Or not, we'll see. And my notes are going old school rather than an iPad. I'm just going to use my phone this morning. I know, right? And my Bible. I'm going to use my old Bible. This Bible I love very much because this Bible has all kinds of stickers all over it. I realized at one point in college if band members can put bumper stickers all over all their equipment, why can't I do that with my Bible? Why can't I put something all over my Bible to remind me of where I've been and what I've done? So this Bible really is a big memory to me. It's a memorialization. Some of these stickers are from the first church plant that I served with. Some of them are as a youth pastor on a mission trip. Some of them are a little later on. Each of these has a great significance in my life. And I've always loved this Bible, mostly because of that. Also because it's a good pulpit thumper Bible. Nice and heavy, makes a big loud sound to wake everybody up finally. After I've put them to sleep. I'm going to start off with a story, like I usually do. When my parents and I moved from Illinois to Indiana, it was one of the most difficult things in my life, obviously. Going to the land of Hoosiers, just terrible. But we were looking around at churches, and my mom tells me this, the first church that we went to, we came in and we visited, and there was this odd thing that was happening that day because everybody was sharing memories with one another, and they were all telling stories. And while they were welcoming and while they appreciated having us there, there was this, we were kind of outsiders thing going on, and we weren't really sure how to handle it. But I want you to know, if you are a visitor this morning, that you are welcome. And even though we're going to do certain things in this that are going to be specifically about this church, it can apply into your everyday life. It can apply into whatever you come from. So with that said, break out your, what are these called? Shims. Sticks. Wedges, sticks, and your markers. And on one side, use only one side currently. This is fun, preaching in the round. I get to keep on walking the whole time. It's an exercise. So on one side, break out your marker. Hopefully it works. I want you to think about, like I said, this is most directly for those of you who come on a regular basis, this is most directly about CMC, about this church. For those of you who don't, you have a history of your own, churches that you've gone to in the past. So I want you to think about past, present, and future, some of your favorite things. And I want you to really think about that way. What are some of your favorite things about attending CMC in the past? Some of your best memories? Just really quick, write one of them down. What are some of your favorite things about right now? What we do right now, maybe. Or who we are right now. Write one of those down. And maybe some of your hopes and dreams that you've had for this church. Something that you've been looking forward to for a long time. So write down real quick just one of each of those. And while you're doing that, while you're thinking of that, I'll tell you another story. Well, I won't tell you a story. I'll explain why there's a tree in the middle. No, we're not worshiping trees this morning. That's not what this is about. To me, a tree is, well, all things are symbolic in some way or another to me. But when I was growing up, at one time in my young youth, at my grandma and grandpa's house, it was an Easter Sunday, and they decided that their present to me that year was going to be to plant a tree. And that was going to be Jack B's tree. Jack B is what my family all calls me. I just realized none of you really know that. Anyway, that's Jack B's tree. And it was this neat thing, and of course at that age, my first thought was, okay, but where's the candy? But as I got older, I realized that this tree was a really neat thing. It was a reminder of them planting this, and that it was of an Easter Sunday. It was an Easter celebration, that every year on Easter that tree was there to remind me that I was loved and that it was going to keep on growing. And it was symbolic of faith that way as well. So it was a reminder of the past. It was a beautiful, wonderful gift that was always in the present. It was just going to keep on growing and growing. And it was a promise of wonderful things to come in the future. So with that said, hopefully everybody's got an idea. If you don't, keep thinking, maybe write a couple down. We're going to move on a little bit. Open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. Because we're going to follow somebody that had these promises and had this history with God. We're going to start with the very first moment. Abraham is his name. And we're going to start with his very first experience with God. Because his very first experience with God in Genesis chapter 12 has always cracked me up. Because the first thing that God says to Abraham is, get up, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to this land over there that I'll show you eventually. What a crazy thing. This is Abraham's first experience with God as far as we know of, and he says, leave everything and follow me. Well, okay. But this comes with a promise. And this promise is the beginning of all of this relationship that Abraham has with God. It's the great promise. I will make you, starting in verse 2, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. What a wonderful promise. If somebody promised you that, I'll bet you'd follow them pretty quickly too. Because Abraham got up and he went away. And this is where this whole thing starts. This is the great past. This is the beginning. The initial moment that Abraham has with God that kicks everything off. And of course, this great nation is what Abraham knows of. He's childless at the time, and he's given this blessing that he will eventually be this great nation of people. So he's trying to figure out how to honor his part of that. He's got to part to this agreement. He's got to have kids, right? So in Genesis chapter 15, he's got a servant by the name of Eleazar. And he's thinking, well, I haven't had any kids. It's been a number of years. We've started on this journey. God, maybe you can make Eleazar the receiving of that promise. He'll be the heir of this promise, of this wonderful future that you have given us. So he tries to pass this along. And in verse 4 of chapter 15, God says, well, God doesn't say this part. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count those stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. He says, I know you're trying to figure this other way out. I know you want to honor this promise that we've got, and you want to figure this out as quick as possible, and you're eager, but I have something really amazing in store for you. It will be like the stars in the sky, like the sand on the seashore. I have greater things in store for you than you can ever imagine, God says. And it will come from you. The promise gets a little bit more specific. And he keeps on, this keeps on happening. Chapter 17. We're going through this kind of quick, I know. But we'll stop and stick with something eventually. Chapter 17, starting at verse 19, we'll get there. At this point, Abraham has had a son, but it hasn't been with Sarah. It's been with her maidservant. And the son's name is Ishmael. And Abraham comes to God again and says, you can do this through him because he's my son. This totally counts, right? And God's response starts in verse 19. After after Abraham had said, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing," God's response is, "Yes, but your wife, Sarah, will bear you a son. And you will call him Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant, way back in chapter 12, will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year." He says, not only have I told you it's your son, but it will be yours and Sarah's. Not only that, but I already know his name. Not only that, but even though it takes 9 months to make and have a child, I know 12 months in advance that you're going to have him. God is in control. All of these things are out there. All of these promises are out there. And Abraham's searching and trying to figure out how to honor his part in that promise, how to honor his part in that covenant. But God is in control. This is God's promise. And he knows how to honor it. He knows how to handle it. He knows that eventually it will come right, in the right time, in the right way. This promise is out there. It's a promise from the past, of great things from the past. It's a promise that's always going with him in the present. And it's a promise of amazing things in the future. Because even though this promise for Abraham is to be made into great nations and to have offspring that are greater than the stars in the sky, Abraham's only going to have one kid. Abraham's not going to see all of these offsprings that are going to come out of him. He's not going to see the promise totally fulfilled. He's going to see one kid come out of it, and that's going to be the covenant. We're going to skip ahead a little bit here. Chapter 21. And this time we'll start at verse 1. You don't have to look around much further than chapter 21. Because finally the promise is going to come about. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. And when Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. He had to wait a while. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter," because Isaac's name means laughter. "And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." It's a joyous occasion. It's a wonderful event. And she added to that, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast." A promise was made. We tried to figure out how to make it happen one way. We tried to figure out how to make this promise happen another way. Finally, God came through and the promise has happened, and we can celebrate. And amazing things are happening, and this covenant is coming true in the form of Isaac. And it's wonderful. So with all that in mind, we're going to take a moment, and we're going to go off topic here, I suppose. And we're going to talk specifically about Wilmore. I want to hear some of your things. What are some of your things? Like I said, this doesn't have to be just about Wilmore CMC. This can be about a church that you grew up in, maybe. Something along those lines. And this is interactive, so you're going to have to speak up. What are some of your favorite things from past, present, or future? Potlucks. Yes. Absolutely.
This is the best church with potlucks. It always has.
Okay. Potlucks. That's a great thing. Fellowship and food.
Right. And sharing.
And sharing. Support. Absolutely.
When my husband passed away, I was very supportive started coming here, they opened up this sanctuary for my studio to
Yeah.
dance in. And then also like that we read the Bible together. And I felt like it's always been a house of prayer, that prayer has been really stressed, not stressed, you know, a good word for that. Emphasized,
Emphasize,
yeah.
sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And also pray that, you know, something when we go to the gospel scene, we had the carpet down, we don't. People would get it back.
I've always felt like this church led us into worship. And so I'm just super cool.
Absolutely. I'm sure for most of you, for Sarah and your interaction with Sarah and I, you think about the past year or so, but we've been out in the boonies, coming and visiting here and there since Nick and Anita moved here 6 years ago now, I think. And this church has always been one of my favorite parts about coming and visiting Wilmore. And I never could put anything to what specifically it was about it. There's just always been a spirit here in this church. I think I said in one sermon that there's a life. There's a vibrancy to the church. No matter how big or how small, there's always been that spirit here that has just drawn me in.
Well, the teaching that we get here, not just from one person in particular, but that everybody has an opportunity to teach someone. And that's really a great thing.
I mentioned this morning a little bit, but I find that being able to trust everybody here is a really big thing. Trust, be able to lean on, trust to share your feelings, trust to ask for prayer, trust to help pray for each other.
Absolutely.
But that's a big factor
Absolutely.
of who we are.
And also, I have a good job at the Jessamine County, it's so good for me.
Great.
Like all my friends there, we get along real good, you know?
That's good. That's good. I had some things over here. God's timing works out pretty incredible. I don't know where it came from. I'm sure one of you knows where it came from. But on the desk in the office, as I was getting ready to do this, I think it's been there a little while now, but there's this folder full of stuff. Was it you, Mike? Is it a folder that you found and put there?
I'm sure it was.
I'm sure. And it's stuff from the history of this church, and it's astounding things from the history of the church. For example, did you realize that last year was our 55th anniversary as a church? June 25th, 1958 was the first time that we as a church met in somebody's home. And it was just about 4 years later than that. This is the bulletin from the dedication of this building. This building was built back in 1962, and it's amazing to go through and to see all these old documents. I mean, this is an original. This was there. Somebody had it in that dedication service. This here was from the 25th anniversary. The mayor proclaimed it Community Missionary Church Day back in 1983. On that day was our day. So those are some wonderful things from the past. Now, I'm curious to know if anybody else knows what this is. This I found in the office a while ago. I'm sure somebody's going to know what it is. These are plans. Let's see if I've got them upside down. I'm sure I do. There we go. These are plans for an expansion. It's probably going to be 2/3 bigger than it is now from the looks of things. At least half as much again. And this one fascinates me because, I mean, I don't know when this is from. How long ago was this? Don't know.
I remember.
Oh, yeah.
When?
Trying to remember exactly when it was,
Mike
but I mean,
Dredd was here.
yeah.
This was from a while ago, though, and it fascinates me because it's looking back into the history and forward into the future at the same time. It's exactly the same thing as that covenant with Abraham and with God. It's that thing where you're looking back. It's this promise from the past. It's been there this whole time as we go into the future. And yet, it's the future. It's a future that has been imagined and hoped for and dreamed and prayed over about where is God taking us as a church? Where are we headed as Wilmore Community Missionary Church? So all of these things, all of these favorite things are things that we have hoped for and cherished and appreciated and enjoyed. And on this Memorial Day, we can memorial it and remember these things and appreciate these things and love these things and hold them close, just as Abraham must have held and smelled and touched and all of those wonderful things that people do when they have their own children, especially after such a long time of not having a child and having this promise. And how am I going to be greater than the stars in the sky if I don't even have one? If I don't even have one yet, how can I ever accomplish this? So with all these things in mind, with all of that in mind, what is it that we do once we finally get that promise, once we finally see it fulfilled? Genesis chapter 22. Starting right at verse 1, and you have to stop as soon as I tell you to stop. Don't go past where I tell you to go. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, your laughter, your joy that I have given you, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled up his donkey. He goes right away. He doesn't think about this. He doesn't argue with God about this. He just goes. He doesn't say anything in response at all. He just goes. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. Well, obviously. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "What's going on?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And stop right there, don't you read any further. This is what we do with this promise. This is what we're left with all of these promises, with all of these favorite things that we've held on to for so very long. They have to be a sacrifice to God. Abraham kept trying to find ways to do his part, and he kept trying to make it his promise. He tried to use a servant and say, "I've got this option over here, God. I know what you said, but you can do it this way." He tried to say, I've got this kid from another mother over here. It still works, it's legal, I promise. Let's do it this way over here. It's my promise, I can figure this out the way I want to, right? And he kept trying and trying and trying, and God said, no, this is my promise to you. This is my future for you. Wilmore CMC is not our church. It's God's church. We, as a church, are God's church. It is His promise that we have been given. And He has greater things in store than we can ever imagine. He has greater ways in store than we have ever imagined. See, this promise, this moment in time where Abraham has to go and has to give up his laughter, has to give up this covenant, this promise that has finally come to him after all of this prayer and sweat and terrible, terrible moments that he suffered through, waiting for it to finally come through. He has to know that he can give this up, that he can sacrifice this to God. His son, his only son, whom he loves. It requires great faith. Abraham proved it right off the bat. As soon as God told him to move, he moved. And he proved it right again. As soon as God tells him to sacrifice his son, he just goes and does it. There's no back and forth. There's no bickering. It requires him to let go of the situation. Because he can hold on to it and he can say, okay, I'll do it, and bring the lamb along with him because he knows and has an idea that maybe God will find a different way. But he didn't even bring the lamb along with him. He took only his son. He had to let go of the situation and realize that this was God's and that God was in control. And it takes a fire and a knife. It takes terrible things that are painful, things that will burn. It takes things that will cut and tear us. The Bible is a double-edged sword. Jesus said, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I came to bring, to divide and to conquer. It takes fire. The refining process is a painful one, refining fire, but that is what purifies us. He's about to lose his son. He's about to lose that promise of amazing, wonderful things that God promised. And yet he still goes and he does it. This promise belongs to God. See, this church that we visited, that I started talking about, we realized at some point through, as they were sharing stories, that this wasn't just a sharing of stories kind of a moment. We realized at one point, I don't know if somebody said it or if we just realized it, this was this church's last ever Sunday. And there we were visiting, caught in the middle of everything. This church was dying and it had died. And it was the last Sunday that that church was ever going to spend together. And we got caught in the crossfire, trying to figure out, should we stick around and, deal with this and be awkward? Should we leave and be awkward by leaving? And we stuck around and everything was okay, but that moment has always stuck with me. What a horrible sensation to realize that as you are here with a congregation, they are a dying congregation. And you don't know where things are going to go, where each of them as individuals are going to go, where the church as a whole is going to go. These trees that represent the past and the present and the beauty and the promise of wonderful things to come. They're beautiful and they're symbolic and they're wonderful. But there's something that we have to give up. All of these things, our favorite things, are things that we have to let go of. We can't hold on to that past. Those past people who were here are no longer a part of us. Those pastors that have been here who we have loved are no longer here. This is not our church. This is God's church. This present will be different one day. As we go forward, this present that can be wonderful will change. The future that we have in store for us, I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. The future that we have a hold of, we have to let go of just as much as the past and the present. And we have to put it into God's hands. And that requires painful things. It requires fire and a knife.
No.
Oh, man.
Oh.
And sometimes we have to do those things that even though everybody doesn't want us to do, even though it's painful,
Good illustration.
we have to give it up.
I think this is graphic, too graphic.
That's why there's no kids. I mean, Eleanor's here. And we have to realize that as God has called us to be here, we have to give fire and a knife to the situation sometimes. And we have to throw it in. We have to take all of those favorite things, all of these pieces of wood that you have written down, your favorite things, we have to give them up. We have to let go of them, because only once we've given those things up can we realize that it wasn't through a servant that God was going to give his promise to us. That it wasn't through a different wife that God was going to give his promise to us. That it wasn't through all these other ways that we can keep trying to grab a hold of and make this promise happen. But it was God's way. And only once it's God's way can he make us greater than the stars in the sky. Can he allow that amazing promise, that wonderful covenant, though even we don't have an idea of how wonderful it can be. Only then can he make those amazing things happen. Now, obviously, I've spent most of the time talking about Wilmore CMC, but I want you to take a moment, and I'm going to have you throw your pieces of wood in here. And tomorrow night, we will burn them up. But I want you on the other side. Drives me crazy to not hear what people are talking about.
Even if it's raining.
Exactly. Oh yeah, even if it's raining. I want you on the other side to take a moment to step outside of Wilmore CMC, of the church, and to think through something that's going on in your life. Because in each of our lives there is something that we're holding on to, that we're grabbing a hold of. And even though I know certain specifics that I was thinking of Wednesday night as we were going through all these prayers that we were giving up and talking about letting go, and that's what needs to happen, here we are, we have to let go. So take a moment, think and pray over what it is in your life that you've just got to let go of. That you know God has something better in store. Write it down and throw it into the fire. And don't worry, this is a 3-sermon series. So come back next week. It'll get better. I promised myself I wasn't going to do this, but I can't resist. So I apologize. It's a comic book thing. Which is why I promised I wasn't going to do it, but I have to anyway. There's an epic Spider-Man comic. Of course it's Spider-Man. There's an epic Spider-Man comic that they said at the very beginning. They have this editor's note moment where they say, the title of this is so profound that I can't give you the title until the very end. So they go through this whole thing, this whole comic happens, and finally at the very end, spoiler alert from 40 years ago, by the way, Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker / Spider-Man's girlfriend, is killed at the hands of the Green Goblin. And they finally give the title of the comic, The Death of Gwen Stacy. See, the title to this sermon is much the same way. I can't give it at the beginning because it gives everything away. The title is This Church Must Die. And that's where we are. As a church, as individuals, there are things in our lives that we have to be willing and ready to give up. That we have to be willing to die to. We have to throw these things in the fire, and we have to let the fire consume them so that we can be refined and come out better on the other side. So that all those promises, all those covenants that God has given us can come to fruition. No matter how painful it is at the moment. No matter how much that knife hurts when it cuts. No matter how hard and how hot that fire burns at the time. We have to go through that experience so that we can come through blessed and promised and with greater and greater things in mind. For all of that to happen, as individuals and as a community, this church must die. This church is not ours. This life is not ours. It is God's. These things belong to God, and we have to hand them over. And we'll start tomorrow night with fire and a knife. We'll pray. And as Mike is singing the last song, or the mics are singing the last song, I'll ask you to come forward and to throw your thing into the pit. So let's pray. Father, keep us in your presence. Very painful things must happen in order for us to grow. Very painful things, very horrible sacrifices have to be given up. But through all of that, we must remain faithful. Help us to always be ready and willing to use the fire and the knife to follow you into what you have called us to do, regardless of how much that means giving up. Things are not always simply how wonderful you are. How wonderful you are is sometimes on the other side of very painful moments. May we always be willing to give these things up to you so that we can move on in your presence, so that we can refocus on who you are in our lives, so that we can give them up and remember that no matter what it is, it belongs to you. It's in your name we pray.